All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ryan Roberts. I'm a Chief Commercial Officer with Veranex, and I'm pleased to welcome you all to what we're colloquially calling What Strategics Want. Today we'll spend time with some of the giants of the strategics, both in medicine and also in industry. We've got fantastic participants who are about to introduce themselves from Medtronic, from Intuitive Surgical, from the Mayo Clinic, the Ventures portion of Mayo Clinic, and Boston Scientific. So please give a big round of applause for our panelists. And we'll get to some introductions. Starting on my left, Dan, a little bit of an introduction, and maybe your fund or funds, their purpose, some of the guiding principles, and just a high level, because you know we're going to get into the details of why you're here and what you're looking for.
Yeah, great. I'm Dan Sheehan. I manage the corporate venture capital function at Medtronic. I joined Medtronic via Covidian starting back in 2008 and have been leading the CVC ever since. We do not have a fund. We invest off the corporate balance sheet, and so we, that has advantages and disadvantages, but we tend to get, each significant financing, new or follow-on, approved individually. Our corporate venture function, I would say, has some independence, but we heavily collaborate. So our mandate, quite simply, is, the target company needs to be strategic, meaning we could see ourselves potentially acquiring someday if the company succeeded. And then after that, we're motivated by financial returns, and we measure and present those regularly.
Murielle.
So I lead Intuitive Ventures. We're actually set up almost like an institutional fund, where we have two closed funds. The first one was $100 million, started in 2020. And now we have a second fund, $150 million, that we kicked off earlier this year. Our mandate is more of an ecosystem play. So we are investing in the world of reimagining minimal invasive care. So we're looking at investment from first, financial motivation standpoint, and second, strategic. So our mandate is pretty broad in terms of what we can take a look at. We do not need business unit support. Our investment committee members are really the C-level of Intuitive, as well as former board members.
Thank you. Nir, I promised you we'd come back to you. Sure. There's reasons for this, which will become evident in a moment. But if we could go all the way to the end. Colin, tell us a little bit about how things work at Boston Sci.
Yeah, happy to. Hi, Colin Morrison with Boston Scientific Ventures. A lot of my answer is going to be very similar to Dan's, not surprisingly. We are a pure strategic investor. We also invest off the balance sheet. As we like to say, that gives us a lot of flexibility in terms of stage, in terms of check size. We lead most of the rounds that we participate in, our initial investments. And I think the only thing we're not flexible on is, again, as a pure strategic investor, and maybe even more so than Dan, your answer may have indicated, we are very much joined at the hip with our business units and our divisions. And so the top of the funnel for us is the individual strategies of each business unit. So it's broad in the sense that we've got 6 individual business units that cover a broad variety of therapeutic areas, but it's very focused from the perspective of definitely has to fit within the strategy of one of those business units. Both the venture team and the business unit need to co-sponsor a potential investment. And I guess I'll leave it at that right now.
Good. There'll be more.
There'll be more. That's why, yeah.
Near Goldenberg, different kind of a fund, being with a large, world-renowned academic medical institution. Describe a little bit, not only the table stakes here of what the fund is, how it's funded, what its thesis is, but what's the approach to investing when there's no M&A option at the end?
Yeah, thanks. So first, nice to meet you all. I'm Near Goldenberg. I'm a director and a member of the executive committee at Emerging Ventures, and I'm leading the technology development function for the group. We have 3 internal funds through which we invest, a small size fund, a mid-size fund, and a big size fund. The bigger one is a $770 million fund through which we invest mainly towards strategic opportunities, which represent a future significant position for Mayo as a key health system in the US. Generally speaking, we are investing, from super early stage, including around new venture formation, and from there all the way to Series C. We will typically not invest post Series C, and unlike others here, we will not lead rounds. And also we are pretty opportunistic regarding our investment criteria. So we will invest in all the different techno-clinical pillars, from biopharma all the way to devices, diagnostics, and digital. And that's it. Regarding your question, I know that's true. We are not in the M&A game. So for us, we have 2 significant or important criteria that we are looking for in order to unlock our investment. One is we would try to identify a corporate development angle for a specific investment, which means that the technology that is developed by the company needs to be able to enhance a specific domain within Mayo. For example, this could be the practice. So if we can identify a significant gap or unmet need or an issue within the practice, and the company could eventually down the line, following deployment of the tech, could help with addressing that need, we will consider investment. The second alternative would be, so we would invest in companies with which we have an IP-oriented engagement. This could be, of course, companies that we spun out, that we created, or companies that has licensed in IP from us, or companies that are entering into co-development with us. So these are the 2 kind of high-level criteria that we are looking for in order to invest in companies.
So let's keep going, and then we'll kind of go to the others that work for more traditional medtech large cap businesses. Does it matter when you're thinking of preferences in investment, does it matter whether the opportunity finds you or you find the opportunity? Said differently, if it comes from inside, if there's an unmet clinical need with a cool technological idea, is that preferred than something you go out and find that meets the same unmet need?
I think for us, we intentionally try to keep ourselves very opportunistic and not to have any strict definitions around that. And that makes sense. Our team is on the ground, here and in other conferences, and meeting with industry, with companies, and then identifying prominent companies that we then bring in and introduce to different stakeholders in Mayo, and kind of share and say, hey, this company is doing something really neat. What do you think about that? And then we also expect our leaders, our clinical leaders, to come to us and say, hey, we think that there is an issue here. If we can find a technology that can help with that issue, that would be great. And even sometimes come to us with a company that is on the radar. So it's an inherent push and pull dynamic, and we prefer to keep it that way.
Yeah. For our corporate leaders that work with more traditional business units, same kind of a question. Do you prefer opportunities that come from the BUs saying, hey, we saw this on the outside, we'd like you to take a look? Or is your responsibility also to look for things that could help the BU? Talk about the BU alignment and how that works.
So I think first of all, as I said, we're in constant communication together in terms of understanding and making sure the venture team appreciates what's the business unit strategy right now, where are their strategic priorities. I would say, probably like all of the corporate strategics up here, fortunately, we're not having to turn over a bunch of rocks to find opportunities. They're often seeking to meet with us. And I would say it's about 50-50. Most of our sourcing comes 50% from our business unit, business development people, and our international regional business development folks that are constantly meeting startups at society meetings, what have you. And then I would say about 50% actually come from our portfolio, where, we're on, several dozen boards. And so that's allowed us to form really broad relationships with the venture community. And so oftentimes we'll have conversations about portfolio companies that might be of interest. So I'd say it works out to be about 50-50.
Murielle, how about in your world, BU alignment, and is there a preference?
So there's no BU alignment per se. So what we would see is the strategy of the BU helps us inform where they're going, and in the next 10 years, we'll look obviously at areas that may be ancillary to that. But from our perspective, it's much more aligned to our long-term strategy as well as what we see in the ecosystem. And like Colin, we formed deep relationship with institutional investors. So we see a lot of opportunities that way, more than through the BU angle.
Dan, plenty of business units, not a separate fund. How does that inform the decision-making and preference?
Yeah, so it's actually not a metric that we track, but I would say it doesn't matter, and we have good relationships, collaborative relationships with our business units. So we're often, joining each other for meetings, introductory meetings, pitches. We have an active portfolio, so we get inbound from the portfolio. I think, I always view business units as sort of, and I don't mean to character. This is a gross generalization, but very, very myopically and a mile deep. But when you get, 20 degrees to the periphery on either side, the expertise and like an emerging new, technology area is, we're sometimes in front of them on that.
Which may make sense, right?
Yeah.
If you're a business unit operator, you've got an operating plan and one coming up next year, and you're trying to figure out how to get there.
Yeah.
Where each of your roles seems a little more strategic. Where might we be in 5 to 10 years with shots on goal?
So I guess most of the strategy between, the relative interest level, because we're willing to champion and originate, even if it's not on a specific strategic plan somewhere. I would say it's far from a surprise, though, when we bring something forward that might be a different perspective than, a published strategy document.
Yeah. What about, so one more on this thought of business unit alignment. If you can think of a deal or a project that you can disclose, what are shots that you might consider taking that have no obvious BU alignment? How do you think about those? Or maybe the corollary, what's completely off limits? What are your guiding principles of what's off limits? We'd never take a look at those kinds of investments.
So I
Since you're here, why don't you go first? Because when you go first, everyone else gets a chance to think about the answer, right?
So Medtronic is a mission-driven company. So there are certain sectors that are not part of the mission. Aesthetic procedures are not part of the Medtronic mission. I know that because at Covidien, we did extensive white space work. It was not just ventures, but it was across the company. And one of the areas we were highly focused on when Medtronic acquired us was the aesthetic space. There were several emerging targets that were very promising. And we learned very quickly, that didn't fit the mission to restore health and improve lives. So that's a showstopper. We have so many business units, we have not delved into even medtech white spaces. Like for us, it would be ophthalmology, or sports medicine, or, non-spine orthopedics. So those are areas where we don't even, we'll take a meeting potentially if it's a relationship, but most of the time we don't even engage.
Murielle, any cardinal rules of things that would be completely off limits?
So very similar to Dan, we have clinically meaningful is important to us. So impact on the patient, so aesthetic would be off limit from that standpoint. The other obvious one is biotech. So we don't take molecule risk from that standpoint. So those are the two that I would say are definitely off limit. anything that doesn't fit into that world of minimal invasive care. So I'm sure there's more to it, but we'll look at ophthalmology, we'll look at areas where intuitive is not present, obviously with a certain angle to it. But I think we have a bit of a broader mandate than Medtronic or Boston from that standpoint.
Near off-limits guiding principles?
I think that for us, as long as we can see that there is a clear benefit for patients, we would consider, to partner, to collaborate, to invest. So there needs to be a very clear alignment with Mayo's mission, which is, the needs of the patients. The patient come first. So that's the only kind of high-level criteria. And then regarding kind of that dynamic with business units and what is off limits, I think that it's an interesting question. Sometimes you do, mainly when you are trying to innovate, for health system, you're trying to bring new technology into the practice or into different domains. Sometimes there is some inherent tension and people are concerned. For example, currently you see that quite a lot. We see that around automation, right? When you're kind of evaluating, again, collaborations or investments in kind of automation-oriented companies, there would be always some concern internally. This could be within a specific cohort, let's say nursing or surgeons or so on and so forth. So there is always a joint discussion, and we try to, listen to those voices, but then still bring that innovation in, and then see how do we provide better care and enhance the way we are positioned, again, for the benefit of patients.
You know the question that's coming, but I'm going to ask a follow-up when you're finished. So,
good
yeah, strategically or just cardinal rules, where do you not want to play?
Yeah, so let me maybe first answer by our initial filters on every opportunity we look at. So I'm going to sort of answer it through the other end of the lens, if you will. But the simplest way would be to think about it is it a call point that we currently call on, and do we have a commercial footprint within that call point? Because especially, we're not as large as Medtronic. There's sort of the obvious bottom line investment conversations that would take place that because of the expense of setting up completely new independent infrastructure, say standing up a new division, right? That's obviously a massive investment that while you never say never, and could be up here in a few years taking back these words, but for today, that's probably not an area that we're gonna go forward with.
Thanks. Follow-on question. I'm thinking about the innovators in the room, thinking about whether inviting a strategic to the party or being invited by you to your party makes sense. When you get down into actual deal evaluation, what influences, what are the top 3 things that influence go or no-go decisions to even move forward, let alone strike a deal?
Yeah, so maybe I'll start off on that one. Figure we're going back this way. Yeah,
we'll invite some banter here.
I've totally beat up the strategic fit. So, all right, set that aside. I think the simplest way that we sort of look at this, if there is a strategic fit, you oversimplified, you think about it in terms of team, technology, terms, and timing. Like those are the 4 core questions we ask, and forms the basis of our diligence, forms the basis of really identifying those, call it 5 to 7 key questions that you need to have answered affirmatively before you would consider investing in a company. And so, most of the time, most startups, depending on the stage, will have 2 or 4, 3 or 4, and oftentimes that means it's not a no. It means it's more of a no, just not now. And so I think broadly speaking, that's sort of our approach and the way we look at all of these areas. Probably the biggest challenge that we encountered that may be more specific is when you have a really early stage company, and most of our investments end up being Series A, Series B. So we're not afraid to go early by any stretch, but when you start stacking the risks, and I'm sure all the innovators out here hear this from the financial investors as well, but how much has the founder, the CEO, have they thought through just even at a high level, appreciating and understanding the risks that are coming down the road, even though you're not there, you're not funded, you're not ready to address it yet today, but beyond clinical strategy, regulatory pathway, do you have an understanding of where that fits? But then also operations. Are you designing the product from the get-go with an idea for future scalability of the product, or is it going to require a full design for manufacturing project after a potential future acquisition? And then, of course, particularly to the U.S. market, the sort of issue that tends to catch a lot of really, really great ideas and make it difficult to move is the reimbursement landscape and how clear that is, or how much work there's really still in front of that area. So that's kind of how we look at it.
Yeah. So Nir or Murielle or Dan, do you think Colin's got all the answers, or do you guys take a different look at it? What do you agree with, and how might you look at it differently?
So I think I'll add two things to that. How transformational for us. We're really looking at it from that lens, as well as what is the expected return for us, as we're looking at it more as an independent than Colin maybe.
Nir, do you have a perspective?
I think pretty similar, maybe a bit different. I think team for sure, agree. And then novelty, strong and unique IP position, which is kind of, sometimes guarantees that there is a potential for the technology to be, unique and to transform or disrupt the specific segment. And then clinical or preclinical evidence, clear one, high clarity there is required. And then, of course, market potential, which is, this is kind of high-level definition for reimbursement and clarity around what's the go-to-market strategy and so on and so forth. And so I think these are the key four kind of buckets that we are kind of assessing around our due diligence.
Yeah, so I don't really have anything to add. I think it's all been covered. I think as I've, how shall we say it, maybe matured or aged, whatever, in this field, I think it's still, I like to be a little more spontaneous than, a 10-line checklist. And, I think every now and then a technology or a company has a clear value proposition and it's really compelling. And they may not have all the rest of the boxes checked, but because of a business somewhere at Medtronic, I understand how that value proposition resonates. And so that's the fun part. I think when, sometimes those aren't even provable with level 1 evidence per se. They're more, time savers, or market growers that may be considered somewhat incremental, but they can be quite exciting.
Yeah, Colin, I like what you said about, I'll rephrase this, kind of thinking with the end in mind, right? In the context of take the right shot into the right segment, which might be evolving or changing, and think back through your regulatory strategy, your reimbursement strategy, all the way through getting it from the napkin to the first pilot that can go to, before human interaction. There's hundreds of things, especially in early stage companies, that can go wrong. So Dan, I don't know if you've got some fun anecdotal stories of, man, we took this shot and I couldn't believe it, but this is the way it went wrong. But when you think about our audience, you think about, what are your heuristics? What are your rules of thumb when you think about, when I'm going to make a bet, what's in the back of your mind of what could go wrong, and what guidance would you give to the audience?
Yeah, so it's basically a science-based process, so it is trial and error. Everything you do in innovation is trial and error. I think it's a matter of, can you move the pile toward the end game in an appropriate enough fashion? Because, I'm used to more than half of the things on my thesis when we close an investment going wrong. It's not an if, it's a when, and if you can keep control of all the variables on the scientific experiments so that you know what to do next and how to reshape the program, the company, the target market, so on and so forth.
Yeah. So you guys have all done dozens, if not hundreds of deals. Maybe turn the coin over to the other side. What are your rules of thumb where you say, well, if everything else were equal, that's what I like to see because that's when it always goes right. Do you have any advice for the audience in terms of what they must have? We've heard other panelists today talk about passion and did they put their own money in and are they convicted to the cause and is there talent? What are your heuristics or rules of thumb when you say if it doesn't have that, I'm not sure if they can make it?
So a lot of that is probably the stage of the company. Are we talking about a company that's got 30 to 100 employees, or is this, an entrepreneur with an idea and maybe 2 employees, and an advisor? And so it really varies. But if we're talking about the early stage, then again, I think it is a ton of those intangibles. And I want to pick up a little bit on what Dan said, and I couldn't agree more. So I'm 28 years into this as a strategic. I've never been on the other side, but interacting with the innovators out there and the entrepreneurs, I'm continuously humbled with the passion, the effort, the flexibility, the sort of like, and I heard a great comment, not too long ago from the founder of Inari, who basically said, if you're in startup land and you're not having one near-death experience a year, right, you're not trying hard enough. So what I would just emphasize is that, one, like Dan said perfectly, we expect half the stuff to go different than planned. And 2, and I'm sure this is the case with all of the companies up here, when we make an investment, we're more than a check, and that's really important. We actually, while not being prescriptive of, hey, you need to do this way, we make all of our different functional areas open to being sounding boards, providing feedback, and it's everything from, operational issues on the manufacturing line to protocol design and development to appreciating regulatory pathways. So, I mean, we're there to be side by side once we're in. And I know you had earlier mentioned about when's the right time to bring a strategic on. And I think that's completely individual from company to company, and you have to make that call. But there's definitely, there's puts and takes, pros and cons for sure, but there's a lot of pros to having a strategic on your cap table.
I'll add to Colin, I think team is really important, and the CEO in particular. So you talked about a lot of the characteristic, and I will say grit and resourcefulness. It's really, really important because there will be tons of pivots or things that goes wrong, and being able to manage that with the clarity, going back to first principle, is really, really important. Intellectual honesty from that standpoint, and leveraging your board. I mean, we're there as more than a check. That's why you bring a strategic to the table. So being open to receive advice from those of us that have seen it from this side or the other side. I have been on the other side. It's not for the faint of heart. Have a ton of admiration for it. So it's just being able to take all that input and that resources that are frankly coming with or along with the check is an important piece that we will look at as we evaluate companies. And that's part of the intangible and the magic, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that, previously you asked us what do we evaluate when we do our due diligence, and some of us said team, right? I think this is what we mean when we say team. We all know, like just off the bat, there are going to be some method, right? It's a methodic, as you said, Dan, it's a methodic process and it's a trial and error, but for sure there are going to be some chaos. We hope to see that there is a good team that will be able to master the known, but also master the unknown, and to kind of go through all those pivots and find the right way to move forward, and just go through those challenges and just keep on pushing the technology forward, company forward, to bring it all the way to the finish line, to bring the solution to the patient. So I think this is what we mean when we say a good team. That's what's behind that.
Let's shift gears a little bit. You've got global perspectives. This is clearly a global audience. What does your experience over the last few years with respect to regulatory changes, how does that influence how you're thinking about investments? And what advice can you give to our audience? I mean, if you liked MDR, you're really going to like cybersecurity and PFAS, right? What have you seen in the changes, and what does it mean for this audience?
I'll go ahead and just start, and I'm sure lots to add in there. But first of all, I think fundamentally we've seen a shift from being probably 10 years ago primarily a U.S.-based portfolio to now, I would say in recent years, we're probably doing at least 30, if not 40% of our deals are OUS companies. I think there has been a ton of innovation now coming out of Europe. We're seeing a spike in new company formation, really clever ideas, but also Asia. I mean, 10 years ago, I wouldn't even visit Asia because it just wasn't worth the time. And so I definitely see a globalization of opportunities and venture. And I guess I think individually, clearly as it relates to Europe, since here we are in Portugal, I mean, yeah, the MDR piece, that the other shift, it used to be the obvious, hey, CE mark, get clinical experience in Europe, then go to the US. Now, I would say half, if not most, of even European-based companies are looking at the US market for EFS versus initial experience in Europe, or 50-50 split.
Yeah, maybe I'll add to the question. So same question, maybe with an enhancement. Does it matter where your investment target is thinking they're going to launch? What have you learned about regulatory? What's your advice? And does it matter in your evaluation?
I think it doesn't really matter. I think that it's a case-per-case decision. I think that if there is a strong rationale behind, which territory or geography you're going to launch first, and it's clear, and the thought process is clear, I think that's the important piece. Just to add to what Colin said, I think we are all in the same boat. We're all, with the shift from the MDD to the MDR. I think we are all seeing, those just stricter regulations and those increased costs, and also those delayed certifications, and this is painful for all the industry. So I think today we're trying to be sensitive, and then work closely with European companies, and sometimes guide them and let them kind of think and learn what will be the first good steps towards the US market. So how do you think about your regulatory pathway? How do you think about your initial commercial steps into the US? And I agree with Colin regarding the deal flow. We're seeing the same. Many prominent companies, very good technology coming out of Europe, Asia, which is great to see.
Dan or Murielle, does it matter in your investment thesis what their target market is for launch?
No, I would say, however, that now it makes it all the more important to have a very well-defined FDA pathway and really think through that than before, because this is going to be the way to the market. And then Europe is sort of not an afterthought, unfortunately, but with MDR, it's created some complexity to leverage the European market. I would say, I would echo what Nir and Colin have said. There's a lot of good technology in Europe, and I think with MDR, it's actually made them focus more on the US market earlier, and in some ways has been beneficial to those companies, though it's created some headwind, because now they really have to think early on about that US path, which for most medtech company, that will be 40% of your revenue down the line. So I actually think that rigor is maybe a welcome rigor on one hand, while at the same time, yes, creating some delays.
Yeah, so it does not make a difference to us what the initial target market is, but like Murielle, I think the U.S. has to figure prominently in your clinical evidence and evidence generating strategy, especially as it plays to reimbursement.
All right, with an eye on the clock and respect to the audience and what comes next, we'll go rapid fire. Two-part question. When's the right time to bring in a strategic? And, without inciting a riot, can two strategics play in the same sandbox? Dan, go first.
Yes and yes. No, I'm biased. So I think, I think strategics bring value to syndicates, and I've been involved in multiple situations where we're not the only strategic in the room. I think as a starting out place, it's not any of our preferred place to be. Yep. But at the end of the day, I think strategics can coexist. I've worked closely in a couple of companies in my current portfolio where we've actually collaborated to help lead tough decisions at the board level on a financing with, the two strategics in the room. So, I know the hypothesis of, 0 is the best and 2 is better, or, 1 is a problem. I think we're becoming much more ubiquitous, and the provider base of investors is growing significantly, in my opinion, and we're doing a lot more with them, and they bring a great different set of eyes and a whole bunch of skill sets to the party that are welcome. So,
Colin and Murielle, same perspective, or does yours differ?
I'd say by and large the same. I think the added flavors I'd put is that just like as you envision the construct of your board and how important it is to have a highly functioning board, well, the strategic, participation 0, 1, 2 plays into that, but no different than there are certain financial investors that you don't want to put in the same room together. So yep. I think you have to look at it through the lens of what's going to be most beneficial for your company. Like everything else, there's pros and cons, puts and takes. The potential con of having two strategics is that it might cause both strategics to sort of pull back just a little bit or be more circumspect of the non-financial help, just knowing that it might end up in the hand of a direct competitor. But having said that, Dan's a great guy. It just depends on the situation and what flavor of strategic.
Nair, you good with the strategic in your sandbox?
Yeah. So we do that. So we co-invest with other health system venture arms. So I think generally speaking, it brings tons of value. There are sometimes some challenges, but I think it's a good thing. So I'm okay with that. And I think for the companies here, if you could get to that structure, I think it's generally speaking good for the company.
All right. In 10 seconds or less, we'll see how the executives do an executive summary. What's your one piece of advice for an innovator in the room if they're considering having a strategic in their investment scheme? We'll go right down the line.
Oh, boy. I think I've been long-winded this whole conversation.
All right, Nair, we'll go to you. One piece of wisdom.
I think the joint dialogue is super important. I think for us to listen to the company and the company listening to us, getting to know each other and truly listening and getting to understand what is important, what is not important. I think that's the key. So that's it. One advice. Yeah.
Clear and consistent and transparent communication.
Right.
Got it.
That's a good one. In addition to that, I would say strategics are actually, could be a very valuable assets on your cap table. Think of them as being that, right? They come in with so much success behind them. Leverage that as much as you can. You will not find a level of depth and resources from any of us, and what I'm saying with the corporation that are behind us, in an institutional. No offense to the institutional, that's not how they built. So leverage it.
Clear, transparent communication, leverage the experience, and be humble enough to listen.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm in marriage therapy. Dan?
Yeah, I'm not sure I can boil it down to one soundbite. I think life is all about people. So the people that you're interfacing with at the strategic matter. And so, I think we view the relationship the same way. The relationship with the entrepreneur and the board matters. So,
Well, on behalf of LSI, and certainly on behalf of the audience, I want to thank our panelists. Let's give them a big round of applause.